Welcome, everyone, and thank you so very much for joining me for another episode of Talking Cloud. Now, this is where we talk about cloud, all things cloud, no holds barred. I mean, we'll talk about anything cloud, SaaS, PaaS, IaaS, FaaS, functions, containers, Kubernetes. I mean, we'll talk about it all. And it doesn't always have to be about security, but we tend to lean that way since we understand that that's really a critical part of this whole thing we call cloud computing. Now, I've told you before, I'll tell you again, I am no expert. But being in the biz for a few years, I got a line on a lot of them. And man, I am fortunate. I went deep this time, and I just got a great guest, someone I've known for a long, long time. And this guy, I mean, he's really demonstrated how people are supposed to climb the career path and really is quite accomplished. I'm excited to have a conversation with him in particular about the company he's with, because guess what they do? Cloud stuff. So, I've known James, gosh, I think it's probably now nearly 2 decades. And when we first met, he just reminded me he probably wasn't even able to drink legally. And now he is the Senior Vice President of Sales Worldwide for Aviatrix. It's James Winebrenner. He's my guest today. James, thank you very, very much for joining me today.
Grant, it's great. It's great to be here, and it's great to get to talk to you again. And I think you're right. I think it's 2 decades. I remember the first time I met you at a Checkpoint event shortly after you were acquired in, and I saw you speak at a customer partner event in New York City, and the rest is history.
Yeah, I remember. Boy, we had some great times back then. That I always tell people, when I went to work for Checkpoint the first time when we worked together, the acquisition of MetaInfo pushed Checkpoint just up over 400 employees. And this was in the spring of 1998, as you know. And so a lot has changed. But ironically, deja vu all over again, went to work for Zohar. And then 3 months later, Checkpoint acquired us, and I'm back. So, you've been busy, and you've obviously been stepping up the rungs. Why don't you take a minute, James, and just pick up where, I don't know, probably close to 2 decades ago when I bought MetaInfo back and you went on your way. What have you been up to? What are you doing now? And then maybe spend a little bit of time telling me and the audience about Aviatrix.
Sure. So it's been a busy couple of decades, and I had a great run with Checkpoint Software. Really cut my teeth in a couple of different roles there on the technical marketing and the SE and engineering sides, and then I wanted to get broader and understand a little bit more outside of just the world of security, and I had a great run with Cisco Systems for about 8 years, and I got bit by the startup bug, and had an opportunity to go work with just a phenomenal founding team in what now seems like everybody's been talking about forever, but back in 2013 nobody even knew what SD-WAN was. And there was a really, really, really great opportunity to disrupt the market that had kind of sat around for 10, 15 years. Nobody had really done anything since MPLS came out in the late 90s, and had an absolute blast building go-to-market for a company called Viptela, and did that for about 4.5 years. And guess what? What's old is new again. Cisco bought us in August of 2017, and I had a Cisco badge again, and had the opportunity to integrate Viptela into Cisco and kind of run that business and see it grow for about 2 years, and had a blast doing that, but was definitely ready to do something else and get to build again. I really, really enjoyed that opportunity, and I saw where the future was going, and I saw that we've been talking about cloud for a long, long time. But the conversations, that I would have with infrastructure leaders and with CIOs, it went from talking 80% about what was happening in their data center and in their WAN, and 20% of the time about what their cloud strategy was, to, over the last couple of years, that got flipped on its head, and more and more we saw people focused on cloud. And Aviatrix was a cloud native, born in the cloud networking infrastructure company, and looking to build out an enterprise go-to-market. And it was love at first sight for me.
Awesome. So what? I mean, first of all, I think you're spot on, and it is interesting how this whole thing's went on its ear. And cloud strategy used to be, we use Salesforce. Right? I mean, that was cloud strategy. And then, it kind of started to change. But boy, in the last 5 years, unbelievable. And the uptick is going crazy. And, this whole SD-WAN thing, I say we're in the era of software-defined everything now. And it really is one of the reasons for companies like Aviatrix and, Dome 9, right, to protect the users from themselves, really, because there's lots going on in the cloud now, right?
Absolutely. And I think you're spot on relative to software-defined everything. I think, the idea of people wanting to, or people being willing to take and manage things on a device by device, sort of discrete configuration basis is just, everybody's past that, right? We've moved towards a controller-based architecture for everything that we do. That's certainly core to what we're doing at Aviatrix in the cloud. And then we've seen infrastructure folks that used to be very comfortable with that command line interface and the sort of box or appliance-based approach. And they've moved and gotten completely on board with the idea that infrastructure is code. Yep. And that was a requirement in order for them to be able to operate at the velocity that the lines of business which were really driving cloud adoption, at the velocity that they wanted.
Yep. It's funny you say that because, one of the things I just spoke on a webinar for a new Swiss partner. I was on, at 5 this morning. But one of the things that I talked about was that if you don't look to find cloud native tools that can allow you to if you have to put your hand on the keyboard for every time you get an alert, and I always remind everyone, in the API world, we don't touch your junk. We just tell you there's a problem. You got to go fix it unless you automate that process. And that's where people have to understand, we'll never take advantage of it if we don't take advantage of it. Not to sound, repetitive, but you know what I'm saying? Is we'll never really be able to make everything we can make out of the cloud if we don't adopt these cloud native capabilities. Would you agree? I mean, is that right?
I absolutely agree. And I think that, if you look at the adoption of cloud by these enterprise customers, it's been primarily driven, by the lines of business, by the people that were frustrated with IT. This is where it all started. It was, everybody liked to call it DevOps, to make it sound good, but it's what we've been calling skunkworks for the last 20 years. It's like, I don't need somebody telling me how to do things. Yep. I've got my own full stack engineer. I know exactly what I'm trying to accomplish. I've got an American Express card and an AWS account, and boom, I'm off to the races.
I always joke and say it's deja vu all over again, but it's worse when you look at what happened when Stanford released virtualization. Right? I mean, when that first came out, and it was VM Server, nobody had it in prod, but everybody was messing around with it somewhere, whether it was in development or test or whatever, right? And it was the same thing. And it was because they could move so quickly. I didn't have to call up and procure a new box and wait for a month or whatever, right? We're in that again, but it's actually exacerbated because now I don't need a card key to get into your data center. I can get to it from anywhere on the planet.
Exactly, and you're running typically effectively two or three different data center platforms, right?
Yes.
Across the different providers.
Exactly.
And that, when we look at, people who they started out in that, sort of, this is just my application, it's my world, I really don't care what the rest of the company's doing. They were able to move quickly, right? They could break things. It was fine. They were able to get accomplished what they wanted. But more and more, first of all, that wasn't just happening in one line of business. That was happening all over the place. And so you had literally hundreds of these applications popping up. And like everything else, as those applications start to have more and more dependencies on each other, guess what? Now somebody does care how everything is communicating. And when security puts up their hand and says, well, wait a minute, this data, I don't even know where this data is.
Yep.
I need to be able to have visibility into this. And so, in a lot of ways, we're right back to kind of the same problem statements, just at a scale and at a velocity that, that we've really not seen before. So
spot on. And it's exactly what I say is you thought sprawl was bad when you implemented virtualization. Think about it now where I just say, hey, James, what's your username and password? Man, I got to get this job done. It's not like give me your card key. I've got to get into the data center. Right. Yep. And the sprawl where, I'll make sure I delete everything. If I connect it to the database, I'll disconnect. Right. But what happens is that doesn't always occur. Right. And that's where compliance falls apart and companies have big problems. But it is the appeal of its accessibility, isn't it, that people want to rush to the cloud? And in fact, aren't the cloud providers saying, hey, come on up? It's easy. It's not only is it easy, but we'll make it as easy and as comfortable for you to check in. They won't tell you that you can never leave, but there's Hotel
definitely
California.
A little bit of a Hotel California going on.
Yeah.
And I think that is part of the challenge, Grant. And I know you see it too. Is it is easy, when we talk about doing it, once or twice, 5 times. When we look at the scale of these migrations, both legacy infrastructure moving into the cloud as well as the new builds. I talk to customers now every month that are in the thousands of VPCs and VNets, and managing that infrastructure at that scale.
That's different than one or two.
The same expectation of velocity of the guy that said, hey, I know how to do this. I spun this up. So it's a very interesting challenge for infrastructure leaders and for operators. Yeah.
So tell our listeners about Aviatrix. I want to, give me a commercial, if you will, but I'm really interested, and I know you've been working with Checkpoint and we partnered up with you guys, but I'd love to hear more about what you do, what your value proposition is, and, I'm sure our listeners will be real interested in hearing about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the value proposition is simple. Network leaders recognize that in order to effectively operate something at scale, they need an architecture. And, we had this, 10, 15 years ago with core distribution access. And even if you weren't running Cisco infrastructure, chances were you were running it in that Cisco core distribution access kind of architecture. And then we migrated to a spine leaf architecture in the data center. And the challenge that we see in the cloud is there has been no infrastructure architecture because, again, the cloud providers just say go build, right? And you build the way you want to build, and you build the way you want to build. And eventually IT is left looking for, hey, I need a consistent architecture and operating model to be able to scale this across multiple regions, multiple clouds, et cetera. And that's where Aviatrix comes in. So we have a networking platform that is fully cloud native. We're not bringing a legacy router in and trying to run it on an instance and say, hey, it's cloud networking. No, we were designed from the ground up to provide enterprise class data plane and control plane services for the network so that our customers have full control. They have full traffic engineering capability. They have full operational visibility across single clouds with multiple regions, across multiple clouds, one operating model, and as you mentioned, we're partnered with Checkpoint. One of the use cases that we see all the time is for enterprises that are looking to bring their security controls in, right? We believe that the DMZ as we knew it, 5 years ago, is going to be completely gone in another 5 years. All of those security controls are going to have to live natively in the cloud. And so making sure that the right traffic gets to the right control, that's part of what Aviatrix does in the platform.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the DMZ, as they say in Europe, the DMZ, it's kind of reminiscent and hangs on to our old way of looking at clearly defined perimeters and physical things, right? Here's the inside, so that must be the outside of my network. And we all know the cloud is, where's the boundary between IaaS, PaaS, SaaS? I mean, there isn't any other than the ones we put in with software, right? So it is completely different. And I think we have to constantly remind our customers, and I suspect you guys do this, to not look at it through the old lens, right? To look at it differently, to see the potential of leveraging the technology differently. Because, I was talking to a guy the other day. I'd be curious what you think of this. He's telling me that now there's new products that are actually using functions in a manner that stands up a connection, sends a packet, tears it back down, and stands up a fresh one to obfuscate the file. I thought that was pretty remarkable.
It is, and it's incredible when you look at, the all of the new innovation around a microservices architecture, and certainly containerization, and this idea of, I've got traditional workloads that are interacting with things that are completely ephemeral, and the challenge is, it all has to work, right? Our enterprise customers, and I know Checkpoint uses this the same way. They're not building one monolithic application anymore and just running on it. They're pulling all these different things, pulling things out of the legacy data center, lifting and shifting those into the cloud. Then there's things that they've developed directly in the cloud. They're leveraging the best of the cloud providers for what the providers are good at. We're seeing a massive adoption of certain platforms from Azure because the value proposition is so strong.
Yep.
But what about when that platform needs access to an S3 bucket that's in AWS? So the requirement to have a consistent multi-cloud network architecture that allows customers to deal with the legacy workloads, the way their new applications are being deployed, but with enterprise class network capability and visibility is really key.
You hit on it. Jumping in, doing it once is one thing, but when you talk about the scale that you're referring to, it's virtually impossible to really use the cloud in a native way without proper tools, without new tools. In fact, I'm sure you guys pay the Gartner tax. There's a very interesting document that Neil McDonald and Tom Kroll published last October where, they're suggesting you can actually make the public cloud data center more secure than your on-premise data center. But it requires using, automation and auto remediation and really clear processes. It would seem one of the things you guys are bringing to the table is kind of unifying and harmonizing, so I can bring all these disparate network environments together, but look at them from a single perspective. Is that what you guys do?
It is, and it's exactly that concept of I need a process that I follow, and I need a consistent architecture that allows my customer, my business customer, to continue to build new infrastructure as fast as they want, but that as the infrastructure owner, as the person that's getting the phone call at 2 a.m. when something breaks, I know that I've got a consistent platform. I know that things have been built in a way that conforms to the architecture, and I've got the tools I need to be able to go and to troubleshoot and to get to the bottom of the problem very quickly. And the interesting thing, Grant, that we see is again, it's a little bit of what's old is new again, right? We build out an architecture. We understand now, okay, here's where our shared services sit. Here's where our egress sits. This is how extranet works. This is where all of our security controls are. And more than 70% of our customers, they don't ever interact with the Aviatrix platform through the GUI. They use the API and they use Terraform, and they turn back around to their internal customers and say, you guys can go build as much as you want. You just leverage this platform. And then we know that everything you're building from a security perspective is going to be conformed. We have the right security controls inserted into the right traffic flows. We've got active mesh. We have the redundancy we built in. We have the troubleshooting tools to be able to run, again, across multiple environments. Because the line of business only cares about their little application, their one environment.
Right.
But how that interacts with the rest of the infrastructure, that's the responsibility of the infrastructure team, and that's who we're trying to make life simple for.
Got it. Yeah, that sounds awesome. So really, you guys, you provide the enterprise level tool set for an enterprise to really take full advantage of these multi-cloud environments and not be burdened with the nuances and differences between one and the next. I mean, is that an accurate statement?
Exactly. We build that abstraction layer at the data plane and the control plane so effectively the company can write once. And then run that environment across multiple clouds. It's funny. I met with kind of back to the DMZ discussion. I met with a customer at reInvent this past year who had 400 VPCs running, and we're just starting to look at kind of expanding what they were going to start to do from a shared services perspective. Instead of having to come back to the physical data center for things. But every one of their security controls still lived in a physical DMZ in the data center. So all of their inter VPC traffic was having to hairpin back down to the data center, run through those controls, and come back up. And lo and behold, they found out that a few people had said, no, I think we want to do egress directly from our VPC. So the security team didn't even have visibility into what was going on. Wow. And that that is the challenge that our customers face, right? Is I've got to be able to provide a consistent architecture that doesn't get in the way of the velocity that the business wants, allows them to build as fast as they want to, take advantage of the tools. I can't build out in just AWS because what if they want to have access to the TensorFlow, implementation that Google has in GCP, right? I need to have a tool set that lets the business use whatever they need to be competitive, but I still have the consistency in terms of both the enterprise class functions and the day two operations capability to be able to effectively run the environment.
Got it. So let me ask, we hear all the time that it's easy, just lift and shift, come on up. If you were talking to the enterprise customer that is hearing that chatter from the cloud providers, what 2 or 3 things would you want to put in front of them to remind them to consider before they bite? But before you answer, I need to pay the bills. So hang on 1 second. I'll be right back.
How well are you protected in the cloud? How fast do you move when the cloud moves at the speed of DevOps? And do you have the confidence you see everything you need to see, good or bad? Checkpoint Software. Cloud with confidence. See it, control it, secure it.
Okay, so what sage advice or counsel would you provide to me, an enterprise that's hearing the cloud provider say, lift and shift, come on, it's easy?
I would say that, day one, building in the cloud is easy. Day two is every day for the rest of your life. And so the fact that you can build incredibly fast with scripting and infrastructure as code, the fact that you can, lift and shift workloads and have them up and running very quickly, that's not it's not inaccurate, but it's only a fraction of what you're going to be dealing with long term. So the importance of really thinking through what does my multi-cloud network architecture need to look like? What security controls live on-prem today that I'm going to need to bring into the cloud, not tomorrow, but over the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months? How do I architect so that I'm ready for that? Even if I'm a single cloud today, do I really want to build an architecture that doesn't allow me to easily scale into other clouds? I had a customer, in fact, I had a customer town hall 2 weeks ago, and they came on and talked about the fact that they were adamant. We are AWS, we are AWS, we are AWS. Now they're in lots of regions with AWS, huge cloud infrastructure. But we got a phone call from them about 3 months ago saying, guess what? Good news is we just signed a new customer. The challenge is they are demanding that we run their infrastructure on GCP. So the good news for them is they built out a multi-cloud architecture with Aviatrix that allowed them to very readily extend their operating environment directly into GCP and didn't change anything from an operational perspective. And they stood it up in about 2.5 weeks. But for people that have locked in and have built only to one of the underlying cloud providers' constructs, that becomes a very, very challenging proposition. So that be careful before you start. Put that architecture in place. Think about day two, because that's every day for the rest of your life. And really be thinking about not just the particular application that's being stood up today, but again, I challenge every customer we talk to. What if you have no data centers in 2 years? What if every control, every function, every your extranet environment, your security environments, and they all have to exist in the cloud? What does that do to your cloud networking architecture?
Yep, I don't think that's that far off, really, James. Certainly organizations, it. We've been around in this industry long enough, and we've seen the startups. They don't need a data center. Dome 9. Operated for 7-8 years. There was no data center. So, those that are born and make use of the cloud from day one, literally, they don't need a data center. I think one of the things we see in America, and I'd be curious your comment on this, but, when contrasted with someplace like India, for example, India does not have the legacy fixed infrastructure to the degree that America does. And that's a double-edged sword because, America, we want to drag it along, right? We want to bring it with us because I don't have a cloud app for that. Whereas there was a lot more and continues, I think, to be a lot more rapid adoption of cloud in places like India because they don't have that massive legacy infrastructure that they drag along. Do you see that?
I think we have just over 450 customers at Aviatrix, and this is interesting segmentation that we do because more than half of those are essentially, as you said, they're born in the cloud companies, right? They're companies that have really never owned a legacy data center. They've fundamentally built out their entire IT environment in the cloud, and that has its own set of challenges, needs its own operating model, et cetera. Yep. But then the other half are the ones that have been running in this hybrid mode, yep. Where maybe it's all they're cloud first, right? They're not cloud only. Yep. What I will tell you though is in the emerging markets, yes, and in the born in the cloud, we see people don't even think about a data center. What we've seen in the last 3 months with the situation with COVID is companies that were continuing to operate a physical data center infrastructure and were maybe taking their migration slowly have accelerated massively. Yep. And we've seen project deadlines get pulled in for decommissioning physical data centers. And it's just, again, it is reiterating the importance of having that architecture in place, having the platform ready to be able to move those workloads and enable that infrastructure across again, multiple regions and multiple clouds.
Yep. So, it's funny. I was just, I was a minute late for getting on this call with you, James, because I had just participated in a round table where we were the host, and I think there were like 14 CISOs from, a bunch of different companies. And it was really interesting because one of the things that clearly came out or has come out of this whole new normal, I guess, this COVID thing, was it didn't necessarily change, but it drastically accelerated perspectives and directions. And what I mean is every one of these guys and gals spoke about plans to have more remote capability, but not nearly at the rate at which they had to adopt it. And so I thought it was really interesting. And one of the questions where I'm going, and I want to ask you, how much memory are we going to have, James? And memory in the context of, if you take a really thick rubber band and you stretch it, and then you let go, it's got almost 100% memory, back to how it was. How much memory is corporate America going to have in the way we functioned and operated once we get over this whole infectious disease threat, what have you?
Again, it's not a change in strategy, it's an acceleration of strategy. And, whether it's the work from home environments that are enabled by VPN solutions, which, I think back again, kind of back when we started with secure remote and secure client 20 years ago, effectively now people are running 30%, 40%, in some cases 50% of their workforces remotely, and that is their primary connectivity. And I think that, again, is something that was already starting to happen more and more, but is going to be definitely the new normal from an infrastructure perspective and a data center perspective. I didn't know of any CIO who was going to the board, asking for $100 million to go build out a new physical data center.
Amen.
Everybody was looking at how do I leverage, colo space, and how do I leverage the cloud? And I think that this demonstrates not just the need to have those facilities in place for burst capacity, so to speak, but really as hey, this is our strategy. This is the way that we can go and move and respond very quickly. And we've got a number of customers in the hospitality and travel industries. And the benefit of the cloud infrastructure being ephemeral was evident, right? We saw some customers spend capacity down 80% over the course of a week or two just to try and stabilize the business. And so I think, again, that trend was already happening. This just accelerated it. And I think to your question on the memory, we're not snapping back.
Yeah, I agree. It seems like more and more companies, as they move to the cloud, are going to want to have more than just all my eggs in one basket. That's where you guys also really play significantly, isn't it?
We do, and I don't see this as everybody always asks, what if I could move a workload from one hyperscale provider to the other and save 10 cents an hour or something. That's not the way our customers are looking at it. They're looking at it as I don't want to pay to operate multiple environments, right? There's very little competitive advantage for me to have a dedicated team that understands how to do all of the infrastructure scripting in multiple environments. I want to do it once and be able to scale that out, because then the optionality that gives me in terms of hey, I'm going to launch a new product. I can launch that product on GCP instead of being forced to launch it on AWS. That's where they're going to be able to drive. That's where they're going to drive savings, right? They don't want that lock in.
Right.
I met with a chief product officer for a great IT infrastructure company 2 weeks ago, and he said, you know what, you guys provide the ability for my team to manage one consistent network across. Today we're in Azure. I'm sorry, in GCP and AWS for them, and we're going into Azure next year. And he said, you know why? I don't like the cloud economics. I don't like being told that I have to pay this because
Right.
this is all margin for me, right? In my product. I said, and so you guys give me the optionality that I know I'm running one consistent infrastructure, and I can make decisions strategically on where I'm going to put the next product offering based on what's best for the business and where I can get the best economics. And so that optionality, but with a consistent operating model, and again back to the Hotel California example. We want to make it just as easy to say, hey, it makes sense to put this product or this workload, here, and we're not having to build out a completely separate operating team in order to do so.
Yeah, right. Wow, pretty cool stuff, man. Pretty cool stuff. I really have enjoyed talking with you, James. I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule. I know you're a big dog now, and I am impressed and proud of you, man. You've done really great for yourself, and I wish you, all the success in the world. Of course, if there's ever any way I can ever help you, please let me know. But thank you very, very much for enlightening all of us on Aviatrix and some of the challenges we need to look out for. Thanks a lot.
Grant, thank you so much. It's always great to talk to you, and definitely look forward to doing this again soon.
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate it. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. There, we're closing the books on another episode. James Winebrenner, known him for a couple of decades. Great guy, really an exciting company, Aviatrix. You check it out. And hey, thanks for tuning in. If you're liking what you're hearing, share it, pass it on, subscribe. And we'll look forward to having you back for another episode of Talking Cloud. Thanks very much. Yeah.